Clinical curiosity. Dr. Nix Tora glided silently through the sterile corridor of the Viridian research vessel Empirical Truth, her 7-fingered hands clasped behind her back. The pale blue luminescence of her skin cast a ghostly aura in the dim hallway, matching the cold calculation in her large, pupilless silver eyes. As the foremost xenobiologist in the Viridian hegemony, she had dissected and analyzed countless species across the known galaxy, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses with meticulous precision. But humans were a particular annoyance. "The specimen is prepped for examination, Doctor," her assistant, Vel, announced as she approached the laboratory. The young Viridian's skin flickered with nervous patterns of light, a biological tell their species had never evolved to suppress. "Very good," Nix replied, her voice melodic yet emotionless. "And please refer to it as the subject. We're not barbarians." Vel's skin dimmed in embarrassment. "Yes, Doctor. My apologies." The laboratory doors parted with a soft hiss, revealing a large chamber dominated by advanced medical equipment. In the center, strapped to an examination table that hovered several feet above the floor, lay a human male. Nix approached, analyzing him with clinical detachment. Athletic build, approximately 30 Earth years in age, dark skin with numerous scars indicating previous combat experience. According to the file transmitted to her neural implant, this was Marcus Reed, a commander in the Earth Defense Forces captured during a skirmish near the Proxima Centauri outpost. "Good morning, Commander Reed," she said, adjusting the settings on her diagnostic array. "I trust your accommodations have been adequate." The human's eyes, a deep brown, with disconcertingly round pupils, fixed on her with surprising intensity. "The room service could use some work, but the view of the stars is nice." Humor. Another peculiarity of humans that Nix found tiresome. "I am Dr. Nix Tora, Chief Xenobiological Researcher for the Viridian Hegemony. I will be conducting a series of examinations to better understand human physiology." "Just buying me dinner first would have been easier," Marcus replied with what Nix recognized as a smile, that strange baring of teeth that humans use to express amusement rather than aggression. Nix ignored the comment, activating her holographic display. "Humans present a fascinating contradiction. Your species possesses suboptimal physical characteristics, fragile skeletal structure, limited regenerative capabilities, poor temperature regulation, yet you've managed to achieve space travel and even minor military victories against technologically superior species." "We're full of surprises," Marcus said, testing the restraints subtly. Nix noticed but wasn't concerned. They were designed to hold creatures with 3 times human strength. "I doubt that," she replied. "The universe follows predictable patterns. If something appears surprising, it simply means we haven't collected sufficient data." She selected a neural probe from her instrument tray. "We'll begin with pain threshold assessment, a standard procedure for all new species entering Viridian databases." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the human's face. "That sounds unpleasant." "Pain is merely a neurological response indicating potential tissue damage," Nix explained, calibrating the device. "Viridians have evolved beyond excessive pain response. It's inefficient." "Lucky you," Marcus muttered. Nix positioned the neural stimulator over his forearm. "This will deliver precise impulses to your nerve endings. We'll start at level 1 and increase gradually until we establish your threshold." Without further warning, she activated the device. Level 1, a stimulus that would cause mild discomfort to a Viridian child, elicited no response from the human. Level 2, the same. At level 3, Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "You're experiencing discomfort?" Nix asked, recording the response. "I've had worse paper cuts," he replied. "Intriguing." Nix increased to level 4, then 5. At 6, a level that would cause significant distress even to Viridian soldiers, Marcus finally winced. "Fascinating," Nix murmured, her skin pulsing with patterns of scientific curiosity. Your tolerance exceeds our predictive models. Glad to impress, Marcus said through gritted teeth. Nix increased to level 7. The human's muscles tensed, sweat beaded on his forehead, but he maintained eye contact with her. His vital signs, while elevated, remained within functional parameters. What motivates this resistance? She asked, genuinely curious. The stimulus is activating your pain receptors. I can see it in your neurological readings. Yet you suppress the natural response. Marcus took a deep breath. Where I'm from, showing weakness isn't always an option. Weakness is merely an objective assessment of capability, Nix replied. Acknowledging limitations is logical. Maybe for Viridians, he said. Humans, we're stubborn. Nix terminated the test, making detailed notes in her database. Your species' illogical approach to self-preservation is well documented. The question is whether this represents evolutionary adaptation or simple psychological conditioning. She moved to a different console, activating a tissue sampling protocol. We'll need to analyze your cellular structure, particularly nerve endings and neurotransmitter production. Does this mean more poking and prodding? Marcus asked. Yes, Nix answered simply. To her mild surprise, the human laughed. Points for honesty, I guess. As Nix collected tissue samples and cellular data, she found herself increasingly perplexed by the discrepancies between established human physiological models and the evidence before her. According to all previous research, humans possessed one of the most sensitive nervous systems among sentient species. Their pain thresholds should be significantly lower than what she was observing. You seem confused, Doc, Marcus said after a particularly thorough scan of his neural pathways. Your face lights up like a Christmas tree when you're thinking hard. Nix hadn't realized her bioluminescence was so evident. There are inconsistencies in your responses. Previous human subjects demonstrated pain thresholds approximately 60% lower than yours. Previous subjects? Marcus's voice hardened. How many humans have you experimented on? 17, Nix answered. All captured combatants, as per Viridian protocols. And what happened to them after your research was complete? Nix tilted her head, puzzled by the question. They were transferred to labor facilities, of course. Viridians do not waste resources. The human's expression darkened. Of course not. Nix proceeded with her examination, running increasingly complex tests on the human's neurological responses. She tested his reactions to temperature extremes, pressure points, even minor incisions, all carefully controlled to prevent permanent damage to the specimen. Throughout it all, Marcus Reed maintained a level of composure that defied Viridian understanding of human limitations. When he did react to pain, it was with a curious blend of acknowledgement and defiance, as though accepting the sensation while simultaneously refusing to be dominated by it. You understand, Nix said after several hours of testing, that resistance is counterproductive. Pain exists to protect organisms from damage. By suppressing your responses, you potentially endanger yourself. Marcus, despite the physical stress of the examinations, maintained that irritating smile. That's the difference between us, document. You see pain as something to avoid. We see it as something to overcome. Illogical, Nix replied. Pain is not an adversary. It's a biological signal. Maybe, Marcus said. But humans have always been good at finding meaning beyond the biological. This concept was so alien to Nix that she actually paused her work. Meaning is not relevant to biological function. And that, Marcus said softly, is why you'll never understand humans, no matter how many of us you dissect. For the first time in her distinguished career, Dr. Nix Tora felt a flicker of something disturbing, the possibility that there were aspects of sentient life beyond the reach of Viridian science. We will continue tomorrow, she announced abruptly, deactivating her equipment. You will be returned to your holding cell. As the guards entered to escort Marcus away, he called over his shoulder, looking forward to it, document. Maybe next time we can talk about why you find us so fascinating. Nyx turned away, her skin pulsing with confused patterns of light. The human was wrong. She wasn't fascinated, merely scientific. And yet, as she reviewed the day's data, she couldn't deny that something about Marcus Reed's responses defied categorization. Perhaps tomorrow's tests would yield more definitive results. Perhaps there was something in human neurochemistry that previous researchers had missed. Perhaps humans were more complex than the Viridian hegemony had been willing to acknowledge. This thought troubled Dr. Nyx Tora more than she cared to admit, beyond measurement. The second morning of testing began with Dr. Nyx Tora arriving earlier than scheduled. She had spent most of the night cycle analyzing the previous day's results, searching for some overlooked variable that might explain Commander Reed's extraordinary pain tolerance. Her inability to reconcile the data with established Viridian knowledge of human physiology had left her feeling something unfamiliar, professional uncertainty. She found Marcus already awake when she entered the laboratory, sitting upright on the examination table where the guards had secured him. Despite the physical stress of yesterday's tests, he appeared remarkably composed. "Morning, Doc," he greeted her with that persistent human smile. "You look like you didn't sleep well. Do Viridians even sleep?" "We enter restorative trance states," Nyx replied automatically, setting up her equipment. "And I did not require one. Your species' inconsistencies required additional analysis." Marcus chuckled. Translation: I kept you up all night. Nyx's skin flickered with annoyance. Today we will explore different parameters. Pain is merely one metric of biological resilience. She approached with a new device, sleeker, with pulsing lights along its surface. This will measure your cognitive functions under duress. Viridians maintain perfect clarity regardless of physical condition. Humans, according to our data, experience significant mental degradation when subjected to stress. "Sounds fun," Marcus said dryly. The test began with mild sensory overload, flashing lights, discordant sounds, conflicting temperature signals, while Marcus was required to solve increasingly complex mathematical equations. To Nyx's surprise, his performance remained relatively stable even as the sensory inputs intensified. "Interesting," she noted, adjusting the parameters. "Your focus exceeds predicted human capabilities. Had a drill sergeant once who'd make us calculate trajectory equations while standing in freezing water," Marcus explained. "This is practically comfortable by comparison." Nyx's silver eyes narrowed. "You were conditioned to endure discomfort. Military training is all about pushing limits," he replied. "Physical, mental, emotional, you learn to function despite the noise, not in the absence of it." This concept ran counter to Viridian military doctrine, which emphasized the elimination of discomfort and distraction to achieve optimal performance. The idea of deliberately introducing adversity as a training method seemed profoundly inefficient. As the morning progressed, Nyx escalated the tests, combining cognitive challenges with physical stressors. Throughout it all, Marcus maintained a level of function that increasingly defied Viridian models of human capability. During a brief pause in testing, while her assistants recalibrated equipment, Nyx found herself studying the human with something beyond scientific interest. "Why do you resist?" she asked suddenly. Marcus looked up, genuine surprise on his face. "What?" "These tests," Nyx clarified. "You are clearly experiencing discomfort, yet you persist in attempting to exceed expectations. The logical response would be conservation of energy, doing the minimum required to avoid punishment." The human's expression shifted to something Nyx couldn't quite identify. "Maybe I'm just stubborn." "That is insufficient explanation," she insisted. "There must be a neurological or evolutionary advantage." Marcus sighed. "Not everything boils down to biology, document. Sometimes it's about choice. Choice is merely the product of neurochemical processes influenced by evolutionary imperatives," Nyx stated, repeating what every Viridian understood as fundamental truth. Is that what you believe? Marcus asked. That everything you do, everything you think, is just chemicals and survival instincts? Nyx's skin pulsed with confusion. It is not a matter of belief. It is scientific fact. Before Marcus could respond, the laboratory doors slid open, admitting a tall, imposing Viridian whose skin glowed with the distinctive patterns of military authority. High Commander Zex Vorn, Nyx recognized with surprise. The military overseer of the research vessel rarely visited the laboratories directly. Dr. Tora, he acknowledged with minimal courtesy. I understand your subject exhibits unusual characteristics. Nyx straightened. Yes, Commander. His pain tolerance and cognitive resilience exceed established human parameters by significant margins. Vorn's attention shifted to Marcus, his expression unreadable to human eyes but conveying clear disdain to any Viridian observer. Interesting. Perhaps we've been underestimating these creatures. The data suggests, Nyx began. I'm not interested in suggestions, Doctor, Vorn interrupted. I need conclusive information about human biological weaknesses. The war effort demands it. Marcus's eyes narrowed at this exchange, but he remained silent. Of course, Commander, Nyx replied smoothly. However, scientific inquiry requires. It requires results, Vorn cut in again. Accelerate your timeline. I want comprehensive vulnerability assessments within 3 cycles. After Vorn departed, a heavy silence filled the laboratory. Nyx found herself inexplicably reluctant to meet the human's gaze. So, Marcus finally said, his voice unnervingly calm, not just academic curiosity after all. You're looking for better ways to kill us. All research serves multiple purposes, Nyx responded automatically. Understanding species biology is crucial for. Spare me the justifications, Marcus interrupted. I've heard them before, from humans doing terrible things to other humans. At least be honest about what you're doing. The accusation sparked an unfamiliar sensation in Nyx, something between defensiveness and, was it shame? Impossible. Viridians had evolved beyond such primitive emotions. We will continue with metabolic stress tests, she announced, deliberately changing the subject. Your species' energy efficiency under duress is poorly documented. The remainder of the day's session proceeded with a new tension. Marcus continued to exceed expectations in every test, but there was a different quality to his resistance now, something harder, more deliberate. He was no longer simply enduring, he was actively defying. As the final test concluded, Nyx found herself troubled by questions that had never before entered her scientific mind. Was there truly something about humans that Viridian science had failed to quantify? Some quality beyond measurement that gave them strength disproportionate to their biological capabilities? You're thinking again, Marcus noted as the guards prepared to return him to his cell. Your skin's doing that light show thing. Nyx composed herself immediately. Rest tonight. Tomorrow's tests will be more intensive. Marcus held her gaze steadily. You know, Doc, sooner or later you're going to have to face it. Face what? That some things can't be measured in a lab, he said quietly. And those might be the most important things of all. As the guards led him away, Dr. Nyx Tora stood motionless in her laboratory, surrounded by the most advanced scientific equipment in the galaxy, feeling, for the first time in her distinguished career, that perhaps she was asking all the wrong questions. The battlefield truth. The alarms tore through the pre-dawn quiet of the research vessel, their shrill wailing jerking Dr. Nyx Tora from her work. She had been reviewing the previous day's data, still searching for the elusive explanation for Commander Reed's resilience. Attention all personnel, the ship's AI announced, its tone eerily calm amid the chaos. Multiple breaches detected in sectors 7 through 12. Unknown hostiles have boarded. All non-essential personnel proceed to emergency shelters. Security teams to defensive positions. Nyx's skin pulsed with surprise as she activated the security feed. The monitors revealed chaos, armored figures moving through the corridors with military precision, engaging the Viridian security forces in firefights that illuminated the hallways with deadly flashes. Humans, she whispered, recognizing the distinctive shape of their combat armor. A rescue mission? Or something more strategic? Her laboratory door slid open as Vel rushed in, skin flickering with panic. Doctor. We must evacuate immediately. The humans have taken the detention level, they're freeing the prisoners. Nyx made a split-second decision that would alter the course of her career and life. Bring Commander Reed to me. But Doctor. Now, Vel. Her skin flashed with rarely displayed authority. If humans have breached our vessel, we need to understand their tactics. Reed is our most valuable resource. 10 minutes later, amid the growing sounds of combat, Marcus Reed was escorted into the laboratory by 4 heavily armed guards. His restraints remained in place, but there was a new energy in his posture, the alertness of a soldier who senses the changing tide of battle. Quite the commotion out there, he observed casually. Friends of yours? I require information, Nyx stated flatly. How did your people locate this vessel? Our stealth systems are the most advanced in the galaxy. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Maybe you're not as invisible as you think. Before Nyx could respond, a massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing her against a console. Emergency lights engaged as the main power fluctuated. Structural integrity compromised in research sector, the AI announced. Emergency protocols engaged. The guards exchanged nervous glances, their training warring with their instinct for self-preservation. Nyx realized they were moments away from abandoning their posts. Remain at your stations, she ordered, regaining her composure. The human stays with. A second explosion, closer this time, cut her off. The laboratory doors buckled inward from the force, and through the smoke and debris, heavily armored human soldiers poured in. The Viridian guards opened fire immediately, their energy weapons filling the air with incandescent death. What happened next would forever change Dr. Nyx Tora's understanding of humanity. The human soldiers, despite taking hits that should have incapacitated them, continued their advance. One female soldier took a direct blast to the shoulder, the energy weapon burning through her armor, yet she maintained her position, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Another soldier, bleeding profusely from a head wound, continued to coordinate tactical movements as though completely unaffected. Nyx watched in scientific disbelief as the humans systematically neutralized the Viridian guards, not killing them, she noted with surprise, but using some form of targeted stun technology. Commander Reed, one of the soldiers called out, spotting Marcus. Secure and ready for extraction. Just enjoying the hospitality, Marcus replied, raising his restrained hands. Mind getting these off? The firefight ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving the laboratory in disarray but remarkably intact. The human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, freeing Marcus from his restraints while maintaining a secure perimeter. What about her? A soldier asked, weapon trained on Nyx. Marcus studied her for a long moment. She's coming with us. What? Both Nyx and the soldier exclaimed simultaneously. She's been studying us, Marcus explained. Time she saw humans outside a lab setting. He turned to Nyx. Consider it a scientific exchange program, document. Before she could protest, the ship lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. That's our cue to leave, said the female soldier who'd been hit earlier. Nyx noticed she was now applying a field dressing to her own wound while still maintaining tactical awareness, multitasking through pain in a way Viridian soldiers were not trained to do. Hull breach imminent in adjacent sectors, the AI warned. Emergency evacuation recommended. The decision was made for her. Caught between remaining on a failing vessel and accompanying the humans, Nyx chose the option that would allow her to continue her research, albeit under dramatically different circumstances. I will comply, she stated, gathering a portable data module containing her research. The evacuation through the damaged vessel became a living laboratory for Nyx. As they moved through smoke-filled corridors and past the evidence of fierce fighting, she witnessed humanity's response to crisis firsthand. A collapsed section of ceiling blocked their primary route. Without hesitation, 2 soldiers braced themselves beneath the debris, muscles straining, faces contorted with effort and pain, creating a gap just wide enough for the others to crawl through. "Go," one grunted, blood trickling from where metal had sliced his forehead. "We'll hold it." Nyx was astonished. The weight should have been crushingly painful, yet these humans endured it voluntarily to save others. When they encountered wounded Viridian personnel, the human rescue team did not hesitate. Despite being enemies, despite the ticking clock of the ship's deteriorating systems, they administered emergency medical aid. "Why?" Nyx asked Marcus as they helped a young Viridian researcher with a severe leg injury. "They are your enemies." "They're injured," he replied simply, as though the answer was self-evident. Throughout their harrowing journey to the human extraction vessel, Nyx observed countless examples of what she had previously considered impossible: humans functioning effectively despite injuries, stress, fear, and exhaustion. They joked with each other even as they bled. They encouraged their weaker members instead of abandoning them. They made decisions that prioritized collective survival over individual comfort. None of it aligned with Viridian understanding of efficient biological behavior. As they finally reached the human vessel, a sleek, surprisingly advanced craft docked forcibly to an emergency airlock, Nyx found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about humanity. The extraction ship detached from the damaged Viridian vessel with a metallic groan, accelerating rapidly away as secondary explosions began to bloom across the research vessel's hull. In the relative safety of the human ship's medical bay, Nyx watched as the injured soldiers underwent treatment. Their medics worked efficiently, but what struck her most was the interaction between the wounded and their caregivers, the reassuring words, the jokes amidst pain, the shared relief of survival. "Your species' approach to injury is counterintuitive," she observed to Marcus, who was having a minor wound on his arm treated nearby. "How so?" he asked. "You acknowledge pain, yet refuse to be governed by it. You sustain damage that should incapacitate you, yet continue functioning. It defies biological logic." Marcus considered this. "Maybe your logic needs updating." "Perhaps," Nyx admitted, surprising herself with the concession. "My observations today, they do not align with our understanding of human capabilities." "That's because you've been measuring the wrong things," Marcus said. "You can quantify pain thresholds, nerve sensitivity, tissue damage, but you can't measure what drives humans to push beyond those limits." As the human ship accelerated to faster-than-light speeds, carrying them away from the battlefield, Dr. Nyx Tora realized that her true education about humanity was only just beginning. This simple reframing, from enemy to patient, embodied something Nyx was beginning to recognize as uniquely human: the capacity to transcend categorical divisions when faced with suffering. In the medical bay, Nyx found herself working alongside human doctors to treat Viridian researchers and crew members rescued during the extraction. The humans' medical knowledge of Viridian physiology was limited, but their adaptability was remarkable. They observed, asked questions, adjusted their approaches based on immediate feedback. Their skin luminescence indicates pain when it pulses rapidly, Nyx explained to a human doctor trying to set a broken limb on a young Viridian technician. The darker the glow, the more severe the distress. "Thank you," the doctor replied, immediately modifying her technique. "Can you ask him if this feels better?" The exchange continued, a genuine collaboration rather than a hierarchical instruction. The human physician incorporated Nyx's knowledge while contributing her own expertise in trauma management. Together, they achieved results neither could have accomplished alone. As she moved between patients, Nyx found herself doing something unprecedented in her scientific career. She began to feel concern for their well-being beyond their value as research subjects. The distinction between clinical observation and emotional investment, so fundamental to Viridian scientific protocol, was blurring. "You're getting it now, aren't you?" Marcus asked quietly, finding her later as she finished treating the last Viridian patient. "Getting what?" "Why we endure. Why we push through pain. Why we fight so hard." He gestured to the medical bay, where humans and Viridians were recovering side by side. "It's not about individual survival. It's about connection." As Dr. Nix Torah watched a human nurse comfort a frightened Viridian child with a gentle touch and soothing words despite the complete language barrier between them, she began to understand that perhaps the greatest strength of humanity wasn't their resilience to pain, but their capacity for compassion despite it. This simple reframing, from enemy to patient, embodied something Nix was beginning to recognize as uniquely human, the capacity to transcend categorical divisions when faced with suffering. In the medical bay, Nix found herself working alongside human doctors to treat Viridian researchers and crew members rescued during the extraction. The humans' medical knowledge of Viridian physiology was limited, but their adaptability was remarkable. They observed, asked questions, adjusted their approaches based on immediate feedback. Their skin luminescence indicates pain when it pulses rapidly, Nix explained to a human doctor trying to set a broken limb on a young Viridian technician. "The darker the glow, the more severe the distress." "Thank you," the doctor replied, immediately modifying her technique. "Can you ask him if this feels better?" The exchange continued, a genuine collaboration rather than a hierarchical instruction. The human physician incorporated Nix's knowledge while contributing her own expertise in trauma management. Together, they achieved results neither could have accomplished alone. As she moved between patients, Nix found herself doing something unprecedented in her scientific career. She began to feel concern for their well-being beyond their value as research subjects. The distinction between clinical observation and emotional investment, so fundamental to Viridian scientific protocol, was blurring. "You're getting it now, aren't you?" Marcus asked quietly, finding her later as she finished treating the last Viridian patient. "Getting what?" "Why we endure. Why we push through pain. Why we fight so hard." He gestured to the medical bay, where humans and Viridians were recovering side by side. "It's not about individual survival. It's about connection." As Dr. Nix Torah watched a human nurse comfort a frightened Viridian child with a gentle touch and soothing words despite the complete language barrier between them, she began to understand that perhaps the greatest strength of humanity wasn't their resilience to pain, but their capacity for compassion despite it. Paradigm shift. Outpost Horizon was unlike anything in Dr. Nix Torah's experience. The human installation, built into the rocky surface of a terraformed moon, lacked the sleek uniformity of Viridian architecture. Instead, it sprawled organically, spaces clearly modified and expanded over time rather than executed according to a master design. The resulting environment felt simultaneously chaotic and strangely welcoming. 3 days had passed since their arrival. Nix had been granted restricted movement within the facility, a privilege she understood was largely due to Marcus Reed's advocacy. The human commander had vouched for her, describing her as a scientific asset rather than a prisoner of war. This distinction had afforded her access to medical facilities and common areas, albeit under constant surveillance. "Dr. Torah," a voice called, breaking her contemplation of the starfield visible through the observation deck's massive viewport. She turned to find Marcus approaching, his stride confident despite the lingering effects of his captivity. "The committee is ready to see you." The committee, as she had learned, was a panel of human military officials and scientific experts assembled to determine her status and extract whatever intelligence about Viridian research they could. This meeting would likely decide her fate. "I am prepared," she replied, falling into step beside him. "Just be honest," Marcus advised as they walked through the curved corridors. "They've reviewed my reports about your assistance in the medical bay. That counts for something." Nix's silver eyes studied his profile. "Why have you advocated for me, Commander Reed?" I subjected you to experiments that many would consider torture. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because you were doing your job as you understood it. And when circumstances changed, so did you. This simple assessment, that she had adapted her perspective based on new data, was accurate, yet somehow insufficient to explain the profound shift in her understanding that had occurred during their escape and journey. The committee chamber was a semicircular room with a long table where 7 humans of varying ages sat reviewing data on personal screens. They looked up as Nix entered, their expressions ranging from clinical curiosity to undisguised hostility. Dr. Nix Tora, announced the central figure, an older woman with short gray hair and the insignia of an admiral. I'm Admiral Chen. This committee has been assembled to assess your status and determine appropriate action regarding your presence among us. I understand, Nix replied, standing at what humans would consider a respectful distance. I am prepared to provide any information that may assist in your evaluation. For the next 2 hours, the committee questioned her extensively about Viridian research protocols, military capabilities, and specifically about experimentation on human prisoners. Nix answered with scientific precision, neither hiding Viridian activities nor attempting to justify them beyond their scientific purpose. So you maintain, said a stern-faced man identified as Colonel Winters, that these experiments on pain thresholds were purely scientific in nature, not designed for military application. The distinction is artificial, Nix replied honestly. In Viridian society, all knowledge serves multiple purposes. My primary motivation was scientific understanding, but the applications would inevitably include military strategy. Her honesty seemed to catch several committee members off guard. They had clearly expected denials or evasions. And now, asked a civilian scientist. Has your perspective on these experiments changed? Nix considered the question carefully. My methodology remains scientifically sound, she began, causing several frowns around the table. However, my understanding of the subject matter, of humans, has been fundamentally revised. In what way? Pressed Admiral Chen. The Viridian scientific consensus regarding humans categorized your species as physically inferior but dangerous due to your reproductive rates and technological adaptability, Nix explained. My research was predicated on identifying exploitable vulnerabilities in human physiology, particularly pain response mechanisms. She paused, organizing her thoughts. My findings have invalidated this consensus. Humans do not merely endure pain, you transcend it through psychological and social mechanisms that Viridian science has failed to properly account for. You derive strength not despite vulnerability, but in some cases because of it. It is a paradigm that contradicts Viridian evolutionary theory. A thoughtful silence followed her statement. Are you saying, the Admiral finally asked, that you believe humans are stronger than Viridians? Not in the metrics traditionally valued by my species, Nix clarified. But in adaptability, psychological resilience, and particularly in collective response to adversity, yes, humans demonstrate capabilities that exceed Viridian parameters. Colonel Winters leaned forward. And you would report these findings to the Viridian hegemony if returned? The question crystallized something Nix had been contemplating since witnessing humans in crisis. If I were to report my complete findings, she said carefully, they would likely be dismissed as contaminated by my capture experience. Viridian science does not easily accommodate paradigm shifts. That doesn't answer the question, the colonel pressed. My obligation as a scientist is to truth, Nix responded. What I have observed among humans represents truth that contradicts established Viridian understanding. I cannot disregard it. Another silence fell over the room, this one heavy with the implications of her words. Admiral Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues before addressing Nix again. Dr. Tora, would you be willing to work with our scientific teams to develop better understanding between our species? This would include sharing Viridian medical knowledge that could help treat injuries sustained by both humans and Viridians during this conflict. The offer surprised her. You would trust me with such collaboration? Trust is earned, the Admiral replied. Commander Reed reports that you worked tirelessly to save both human and Viridian lives aboard the rescue vessel. That's a beginning. After the committee session concluded, Nix found herself back on the observation deck, watching the stars with new appreciation for how differently humans perceived them. To Viridians, stars were navigational markers, energy sources, strategic positions. To humans, they seemed to represent something more: possibility, wonder, even mystery. So, Marcus said, joining her at the viewport, scientific collaboration instead of prisoner status. That's quite an outcome. It is, unexpected, Nix admitted. My people would not have been so accommodating to a captured enemy scientist. Maybe that's part of what you're starting to understand about us, he suggested. Humans are pretty good at seeing potential where others see threat. She turned to face him fully, her bioluminescence pulsing with the complex patterns of deep contemplation. Commander Reed, Marcus, there is something I have been unable to quantify about human response to adversity. Perhaps you can provide insight. I'll try. When faced with pain, hardship, even mortal danger, humans often respond with a behavior that appears counterproductive. You make references to unrelated positive experiences, you engage in what you call humor, you seem to deliberately minimize the severity of your situation. This pattern was consistent in you during captivity and in your fellow soldiers during crisis. What is the purpose of this response? Marcus smiled, that uniquely human expression that Nix had initially found so disconcerting but now recognized as a signal of genuine connection. It's how we cope, he explained. Humans have always faced things bigger and more powerful than ourselves: predators, natural disasters, disease, and yes, even advanced alien civilizations. We learned long ago that fear and pain are more manageable when shared and transformed. Transformed? When I joke about pain, I'm not denying it exists. I'm refusing to let it define my experience. When soldiers laugh in the face of danger, they're creating something stronger than fear. It's not biological, it's psychological, maybe even spiritual. Nix considered this. Your strength derives from acknowledging vulnerability rather than eliminating it. Exactly, Marcus said. Perfect strength isn't the absence of weakness, it's finding power despite it, sometimes even because of it. As the stars slowly wheeled beyond the viewport, Dr. Nix Torah began to formulate a new scientific understanding, one that encompassed not just the measurable aspects of humanity, but the ineffable qualities that had allowed this physically unremarkable species to endure and thrive despite all odds. She had come seeking weaknesses to exploit. Instead, she had discovered strengths worth emulating, resilience born not of imperviousness to pain, but of transcending it, power derived not from individual capability, but from collective support, advancement driven not by perfection, but by the continuous overcoming of limitation. I believe, she said finally, that there is much the Viridian hegemony could learn from humanity, if we were willing to recognize that strength manifests in forms we have not been measuring. That sounds like the beginning of understanding between our species, Marcus observed. Perhaps, Nix agreed, her skin glowing with the distinctive pattern of new scientific insight, a pattern that, for the first time in her distinguished career, was infused with something that might be described as hope. Or perhaps it is simply the recognition that true knowledge begins when we acknowledge the limitations of our measurement. As human and Viridian stood side by side, contemplating the vast cosmos that had brought their species into conflict, Dr. Nix Torah understood that her greatest scientific discovery was not about pain thresholds or resilience metrics, but about the infinite capacity of sentient beings to transcend the very limitations that defined them.